Hello,
Hello there, Scott. How are you?
not too bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah.
Good. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself today because I know you've got a new title and I don't know what it is. So,
My new title.
or your new position, your new
Oh,
title.
hold on now. I'll rename myself. Yeah. And it might show up now. There you go. I renamed myself. I don't know if you could see the name now, just halfway through.
Oh, you're Queen's Counsel now.
Yeah. Yeah, I am. Yeah.
How do you get that designation?
Well, you have to be a lawyer for about 15 years.
Okay.
And then you apply, and there's a Queen's Counsel committee that meets, made of the judges, lawyers, and academics, and they look at your service record, your service to the profession, your service to the public, and your reputation, and yeah, basically, if you've
Oh,
been in,
congratulations.
yeah, and so yeah, they give about 10 a year.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, you mean nationally or provincially?
provincially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still, that's not very many.
No, it's not. And so, yeah, I think this year there was about maybe, well, I think this year there was about 12.
Okay.
There's over 2,000 lawyers every year.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's basically means it's kind of like well, as one Queen's Counsel told me, he says, Dumal, congratulations. Don't let it go to your head. Is if all the years he's been a Queen's Counsel, he said the Queen has never called him for a leave. So yeah. Mm. But it also means that I had to buy new clothes,
Ah,
new gown. I had to buy a new gown and new
okay.
silks. They call it the silks.
Okay. So you have to wear that when you go to court?
Yeah, if I have to go
Okay.
to court, I have to wear them, and that also all the other lawyers wear polyesters or cotton.
Okay.
We wear the silk, and so if I have a case before a judge, I get called up on first.
Okay. Oh,
It's a ranking type of thing too. So yeah.
that's like the American Express card ads. Membership has its privileges.
Yeah. Oh my God. I caused a little bit of a ruckus on social media recently with that American Express card. I don't know if everybody knows that they were selling. There was a release of I think the Nintendo PS5 gaming
Okay.
system. It's a gaming system, right? And all of my family were online. They were trying to get it at the source at Best Buy. They're all online and they were clicking, trying to get it. And so I joked with them. I said, well, you do know that if you have the American Express Platinum or the Black Card,
Right.
you can quote unquote skip the line. When you do with concert tickets or something like that, and you can go buy this PS5 gaming system.
Okay.
I said, well, I don't know what I would do with that. Last time I played a game was Pac-Man back in the 80s. Well, I meant it as a little joke, but I got over 100 requests for people for me to buy it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the hottest. I guess it's the hottest toy for Christmas. Yeah.
I remember getting upset at airports when people they had a line for Amex folks or something that you'd skip the long line for a short line. So and then all those people who were frequent travelers that got bumped ahead for the lineup.
Yeah, they don't do that anymore. I mean,
No.
no, I mean, well, maybe the major airports, I suppose, in America, but here is like, Halifax, Sydney, Halifax. You're lucky to get an airplane now.
I think that's entirely gone.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not going to be any traveling much lately. Oh, I guess we're on time here, so I guess we can begin. So I'd like to introduce Duma Young, and this is who's recently become a Queen's Counsel, and Duma's a lawyer, obviously, as a Queen's Counsel, and he's got a new directorship at CBU, or I think it's a directorship, but I'll let you explain what your new position at CBU is, Duma, and he's going to tell us something about Indigenous law, not the Indigenous law cases that we've been looking at, which are, I guess you could frame it settler law or colonial law applied to Indigenous issues. This is what law might look like, or does look like, from an Indigenous perspective. So, Duma.
Okay. Well, on in there, Scott. Thank you, everyone. And I'm glad to be here on virtual territory here. And yeah, it's great. As Scott alluded to, I do have a new title. It's called, I'm now the director of the Indigenous Law Institute at Cape Breton University. And I think that's even going to change. The naming of the institute is called the Donald Marshall Jr. Legal Institute. And it's a primary focus of it will be environmental law and climate change and Indigenous law applications to it, right? So, and that's to distinguish it from all the other institutes all across Canada. Just to give you a little background of who I am, my name is Duma Young. I grew up in Maligawach First Nation. Nobody knows where that is. It's on the little sandbar on the west side of Cape Breton near Orangedale. So I tell people my band is Eskizoni, and everybody says, oh yeah, Eskizoni, yeah. But I've worked all over in many communities, and the vast majority of my work has been with Membertou First Nation. So yeah, I became a lawyer by chance. I wasn't planning on becoming a lawyer. I had graduated from Cape Breton University in 95. 97. 97. I went to school. 95 is when I graduated from Dal. 97 is when I graduated from CS, University College of Cape Breton at the time. And sorry about that. I get notifications as to emails here. I don't know how to get that out of the way. Well, I'm just going to close that off and close off all the windows so that I don't get any more notifications on anything. Just give me a second there. Now everything's all closed except Zoom. Oh no, Safari is still open, so that's gone. When I graduated from CBU, I graduated with a BA in Mi'kmaq Studies, specializing in ethnobotany. And I had applied to go to St. Mary's University and do a joint degree with the Dalhousie School of Pharmacology to become a pharmacist who can dispense herbal medicines. And but they kept losing parts of my application, so I applied to law school as a backup. And so here I am as a lawyer now. So in 2001, I was called to the bar in Nova Scotia, becoming the first Mi'kmaq speaking lawyer in Nova Scotia. I went on to do my master's in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy at the University of Arizona. Now, all that, when I was at the University of Arizona, I was the guardian ad litem for children in care, custodial parents, and incapacitated adults. So I would appear in the Tohono O'odham Tribal Court as a guardian ad litem. And in this one case, I remember specifically, the couple were divorcing and they were fighting over custody of the children. So I was asked to interview the children, and I did. And this is a gaming tribe, so they have a casino and they have fairly wealthy money, and so they are still just starting out new. So they just are trying to generate their wealth to help alleviate social conditions. So they had a wonderful courthouse on the Tohono O'odham Reserve. Beautiful courthouse, brand new. They had O'odham judges. They had O'odham attorneys representing both the mother and the father. They had an O'odham clerk. They had O'odham sheriff. And it was just right on. It was on the community, and everything was is, part of the self-government issues, right? And they were self-governing in their own respect. So I asked them, well, can I see your Autumn law regarding child custody cases? What is the Child Protection Code? And so they gave it to me. And when I looked at it, it looked very, very familiar. And I thought, wow, this. So I went to the University of Arizona Library and I looked up the state Arizona code, word for word, almost the same. Where it said, state of Arizona, they scratched it up, put Autumn Nation. And I thought, how is this law traditional or custom or Autumn at all? It's not. It's not. You can have the building is all located on the Autumn Reserve. All the people involved were Autumn. Everything involved, the parents, everybody there were all indigenous. But the law we were using was really the state of Arizona law. And I thought, oh, that got me to thinking, where do we look for our indigenous law? Where is it? If it's not located in the statutes, where is it? So I got started to think, and that's where I eventually ended up writing that paper, Illinois Debludan, that I think that was assigned readings for this class, right? So as a result of that, there's a couple other things that I did. One is that when I was doing my research into indigenous law, in particularly Innu law, which is the law of the Mi'kmaq people, and that's what we call ourselves, Innu. We don't call, when we refer to ourselves individually, we call ourselves Innu. We don't say Mi'kmaq, And Mi'kmaq is when we refer to ourselves to outside people. And there's a whole history of that, as to how that word was mistakenly applied to the Innu people, as a mistake. And there's other variety of other names that the Innu were also known as: Cape Sable Indians, Sauroqua, Micmacs, Millimacs, so a variety of names, a porcupine eating people, etc. But we call ourselves Innu because that means people of the same tongue. And our neighbors to the north of us, if you go across the St. Lawrence Seaway, the neighbors are the tribe next to us is called the Innu. They used to be also referred to as Mataniye Nasapkis, but Innu they call themselves, and their neighbors are what are often referred to as James Bay Cree, and the James Bay Cree refer to themselves as Eyu, and then even further north you have the Inuit, or the Innu too. Also the Innu. So here in this area, you have Innu, Innu, Eyu, and Inuit, all part of the Algonquin linguistic family. So that's our cousins. Theoretically, you are supposed to understand your neighbors to the north, to the south, just the people who live next to you, and all the way down. So our language goes all the way down to North Carolina, even as far as Florida. And so that's part of the linguistic family here. So I went back and I thought about it and I said, well, the language tells us where our laws are, what our laws are. And then I realized when I did some research, somebody sent me a song that was done by, song was done by in the 1950s, I believe, by Captain Ben Christmas in Membertou First Nation. And it was recorded. It's on the Membertou Petroglyph site. I'll link it up shortly anyway. And he sings this marriage song. So as an aside, I'm a justice of the peace and I can do some marriages. And I was wondering, how did we, Mi'kmaq people, Innu people, how did we do marriages prior to, the French arriving or the British, And so in this story, he tells about what are the rules for establishing a marriage between a couple. And I just realized that in constitutional law, the Canadian constitutional law, the Section 92 gives authority to the provinces to solemnize marriages. In order for a marriage to be valid, these are the little things that have to happen. There's the vows, this is the ceremony, this is the things. This is how a marriage is to be solemnized. But Section 91 of the Constitution gives authority to the Canadian government, the federal government, to dissolve a marriage. This is how a marriage dissolves. But under Ben Christmas's song, storytelling, he illustrates how the Mi'kmaq people had this powers both the solemnization of the marriage, because there also the song that he refers to is also called a marriage divorce song. This is what you have to do. So to give you a little example, a young person who wanted to get married had to speak to his or her parents first, and let them know. They had to hold a feast. They had to invite everybody who was interested in marriage. Sometimes people came, choice was an issue. And if they did, then they moved off together. He sang a hunting song, the Dublin Goit, and they got together and stayed together for about a year, no tabungkwag. And in that year, the both parties had to prove that they were capable of being in a marriage. And I'm going to use an opposite sex marriage. The husband had to hunt the moose and show that he could provide for the let's see, hold on, let's bring out here, speaker view. Yeah, a husband had to provide a moose and provide for the family, and the wife had to show that she can maintain a household and also do all sorts of other stuff. And after about a year, they came back to the community. They had another feast. They had more singing, more dancing, no party, stuff like this, and they announced to the community that the marriage was successful. And if it wasn't, then they also had a song that they said that was, why they were not successful in the marriage. And then they were both free to leave and go off and stuff like this. So the Mi'kmaq people, or the Innu people, we had the authority, and this is how we did. Oh, here's my coffee right here. Nick's bringing me coffee here. So thank you, Nick. I find that when I'm on these Zoom calls, my throat gets a little parched, and coffee in the afternoon is very good. So, and getting back, so the Mi'kmaq and the Innu people had all this authority to legislate and create legislation over solemnization and the dissolution of marriages, and there was particular requirements, no different than what is required in the province of Nova Scotia's solemnization requirements or the divorce requirements, Divorce Act. The question then always became to me was, how do we take and find these traditional or indigenous or Innu Debuludakan, the laws or legal principles, and how do we apply them in a contemporary setting? Is one thing for a marriage to dissolve and you have a feast and sing a song, let the community know that the marriage doesn't work, and then they're both free. The wife goes back to her family and he goes back to his family, and they're both free to marry again. But in a contemporary time, we have subsequently issues of matrimonial property, child support, spousal support, all of these other factors in place. So the real challenge with Indigenous law was not that it does not exist. It's how we're going to use it in a contemporary time. So that's in it in a nutshell. And I just want to make the other point before I move on to the presentation, is that I want to make very clear that the Indigenous law, when I refer to it, is or Ilnue Debludahan, and I want to refer specifically to the Mi'kmaq laws or the legal principles, is completely and utterly different than Canadian law or Aboriginal law. Yeah, and Aboriginal law is really Canadian law as it applies to Aboriginal people. For example, the Indian Act, or taxation issues, or land claims issues, or small, or specific land claims issues, or negotiations, or even many other things. So those are all Canadian law as it applies to Indigenous people. Here's for a good example is status. The Indian Act defines who is considered to be eligible to be registered as a quote unquote Indian. And when I use that term in the context of it, I use it in the current terms of the legal definition of Indian Act. So you can be an Indigenous person without having status. You can be registered as a Canadian Indian under the Indian Act and not be Native. And so the Canadian Indian Act defines who is considered or registered as a Canadian and Indian under the Indian Act. It's not up to the Mi'kmaq community to define or say who's Mi'kmaq or not. That power and authority was taken away and given to the Canadian government. That's Aboriginal law. That's not Ilnui Blue Ilnui, and there's a new negotiating process coming out, and basically folks are saying, we are going to define who's a member of our community, who is going to be a citizenship, and it's based on our legal principles, not the Indian Act. So in the future, once these negotiations are completed over self-governance, for the Mi'kmaq people here in Nova Scotia, carrying around a status card is not going to mean a whole much. Doesn't mean anything anymore, really. So let me go into what did I do with that here? Okay, I know I put. Oh, here it is. I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to share screen. Just give me a second here, and we'll. Okay, here we go. Close that up a little.
Fortunately, Duma, I don't know if you can do that if you're not the host.
Yeah, do the host then. Make me the host.
Do you know how to I do that?
Yeah, you go into participants.
Yes.
Yeah, and you see my name.
Yes.
Click on it and say make host.
Gotcha.
Okay, now I don't admit somebody who's waiting. Arctic. So there you go. Look, I got all the power now.
That's right.
Okay. Now, and if you want to ask a question, just go and put it in the chat box, and I'll also monitor the chat. But here's the share screen. I'm going to share this, and okay, there we go. And I'm going to minimize. Hold on. Just want to make sure that. There we go. High thumbnail versus and. Okay, can everybody see that? You don't all have to speak at once. Can you?
It's visible. Duma.
Okay. This is the presentation that I used in my paper that I wrote, Ilnui Debludan, a foundational worldview for Mi'kmaq. People, first of all, ask, well, how can we have more than one law in Canada? There has to be only one law, and when they think about it, when they refer to a state law, they often think it's the criminal law. Canada has more than one law, or more than one legal institution, more than one source of legal principles. For example, we have the Canadian common law, which is found in most provinces, and then we have the French civil code, which is found in Quebec. However, it's a blend. It's not quite the French civil code in all of Quebec. There is a portion of the Canadian common law that applies in Quebec, and that's the Canadian criminal law. Now, the civil code regulates private relationships between individuals and institutions, and that's in Quebec, and that's where the civil code rests. Meanwhile, if you do a criminal act or anything to do with the criminality or the regulating of human behavior, that falls under the Canadian Criminal Code, which applies just as much in Quebec as it does everywhere else. When people say Quebec has a different law, yes and no, it does. They have the civil law, and they also participate in the Canadian common law through the civil criminal procedure code. And also some federal laws do apply, and that's for example, the Indian Act applies in Quebec too. Whereas the rest of the provinces, it's all predominantly the common law. And, so it's generally pretty well all the same, everything. You have to understand that in the Canadian context, private law or the, law or the relationships between individuals, civil relationships or the civil law is considered private. The Canadian state will not interfere with, for the most part, between contracts, even disputes, or if there's a fight between Irving and the McCains, That is hashed out in the Canadian civil courts. The Canadian state would not really normally interfere in that. The public law is where the state imposes its own rules, norms, regulations, laws on the subjects or the individuals within the state. And that's where you have public law, such as criminal matters or quasi-criminal or regulatory, quasi-criminal regulatory matters. You have a whole bunch of stuff that fits in there, but the easiest one to remember is the Canadian Criminal Code. You also have regulatory schemes like, for example, the Nova Scotia hunting and fishing regulations. That's a quasi-criminal regulatory body or institution, I should say. So when we're talking about Indigenous law or Illinois Debludahan, we're talking almost about the reverse. Flip that aside. The private becomes the public and the public becomes the private in Indigenous context. And the reason for that is that the whole purpose of legal theory and legal regulation is to basically regulate human behavior in a quasi unnatural community. Canada as a whole is maybe considered an unnatural community because it's just in terms of natural processes, it's too large, too diverse, too complex to be ruled by a natural community-based or established legal principles or legal institutions. And it's also can be seen as an immigrant-based area, whereas people from different communities, different diverse come together, and they have to have some sort of a public form in which to regulate and determine how people are to behave. And that's where you get. Whereas in local Indigenous communities, in the source of the law is rested in a natural community. These communities are made of the small, family-based, kinship-based, linguistic-based connections, and the private law becomes the public. So in that sense, you get that sense. So regulating human behavior is a different approach in Indigenous-based communities than it would be in a country-based community. So the title of this slide is called Goe na Alnui Dasink. The other question that people often ask, oh yeah, I just want to go back to that first point there. I said people often say, can we have, we can't have more than two sources of laws, or there should be one law for everybody. Well, I remember when I did a interview for CBC Information Morning here with a local host here, and that's exactly the question he asked me, and I said, why not? Why can we not have? There is a concept in legal theory, it's called legal pluralism. The existence of more than one laws can easily exist in the same legal space. And I had to give him an example of that. For example, I said, Canadian law applies, we can have Indigenous law apply, but even at my place of work, Cape Breton University, there are many different legal spaces there that exist. If you are a student, you're bound by the student model code or the code of conduct for students. The state doesn't really interfere in that. If, for example, if a student were to plagiarize, you won't find the Cape Breton Regional Municipal Police coming to charge you with plagiarization. There's a different approach to it, and there's a different legal scheme that will address that, and that purports to regulate student behavior while at the campus. He said, and then even within the campus, I mean, there's the contracts, private contracts that regulate the behavior between the employer and the employees through collective bargaining, or even contractual basis for those outside of the unions. So you have a different, and any disputes there are regulated or according to what's contained in the collective bargaining in the contract there. And so you may have arbitration, grievances, the whole process. You don't find folks running to the Canadian court system to file for redress in a dispute between the administration and CBU and the faculty. That's take place. So you have a different type of law there, or legal institution there. In the outside, even the churches, the Catholic Church here has canon law. For example, you can get a divorce according to the Canadian Divorce Act, and it's in a civil divorce, but the Catholic Church may or may not recognize that, especially if you're a member of the Catholic faith. So what you have to do is you have to go through their canon law and their canon legal tribunals to apply for a dissolution of your marriage. And only in the eyes of the Catholic Church, only if you were to do that, then your marriage is dissolved. So we have all sorts of sources of different administrative laws, military law, even the professions, legal professions. For example, the Barrister Society, we regulate all the lawyers in Nova Scotia, the physicians and surgeons of Nova Scotia. They have their own processes. So the quick answer to the question of like, why should Indigenous people have their own law? Why not? No. So, and then they say, where is it located? How is it can we see it? Can we read it? Often is the question. And so I tell people, before you can even go there, the difficulty is understanding Illinois Debludan is find out where it is located, first of all. It's not in the Dominion law reports or the Supreme Court reports or in precedent. It's in this form and a place outside of itself. And even a lot of Indigenous people may not know where it's located, but they may understand it. So I tell people this is where you have to think about how the worldview, how Innu or Indigenous people approach the world. So first of all, I'm going to skip over a lot of things because I know we don't have a whole lot of time, and I can talk like for several hours. Ilnui Daism, it's a particular way of seeing the world, a worldview. And in this worldview, it shows that there's a unique set of rules, regulations, observation, protocols associated with how you deal with your relatives. There's some wonderful articles and books that were written by Ruth Williams Whitehead, and she talks about the 6 worlds of the Mi'kmaq people. And so in this sense, Illinois Debludan tells you how to deal with your relatives in the other 5 worlds. Now, some people have commented that there's not 6 worlds, there must be 8. And the names of these, some people call them worlds, some people call them spheres. I've taken the liberty of calling them wigwams, which is like a home, a location, similar to a teepee, a wigwam that the Innu use. So I call these worlds the deep earth world, the water world, the wigwam, earth wigwam, root world, ghost world, sky world, light world, ancestors' lodges. And the Illinois Debludan, these legal principles, that we are told, and they're to help you navigate these various worlds. As you move from one world to another, you will encounter different life forces in these worlds, and that you have to know how to engage with them according to the rules, the protocols, the laws. And so these worlds, and again, I'm going to go back to these worlds existed, and this is how they were classified before the French and the English came. Now, if you want to think about the more contemporary worlds, I'm going to use myself as an example. I am a member of many different worlds. I move between different worlds. I move between the academic world. I move between the legal world. I move between the justice world. I move between the community world. I move even on class. I can have dinner with some of the elite, the business elite in Nova Scotia, and I can walk down the street and, or here's a good example. When I was getting my Queen's Counsel, I was at Government House and I was with the Lieutenant Governor, the Minister of Justice, and and there was the President of the Bar Society, and others, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia Appeals Court, and a lot of high-ranking societal people. And then once I did finish that, I drove down and I attended a memorial event at Uniacke Square, a housing development for low-income folks, where I knew a woman who had lost her son, and they were having a Memorial Day. So in the space of about 1 hour, I was moving from being at Government House and joking with folks that maybe my next residence is going to be in the Government House as Lieutenant Governor, and then going to Uniacke Square, what would be called the projects. That's the kind of world. And when you're in each world, there are different rules, principles, and protocols and laws that you have to abide by, So, and neither one are better than the other. They just are. They're just different in each world. So every one of us moves between different contemporary worlds, or wigwams. So what are these principles, these legal principles? I say they're found in stories. Where are they? I tell people they're found in stories. That's why you'll see a lot of Indigenous people and many tribal members are profound storytellers. This morning I was listening to a story that an elder from Eskizoni was telling about how they used Anko Dasink, Aranqueyak, Akisigwenk. These are concepts, legal concepts related to adoption, foster care, and inheritance related to adopting somebody or child rearing when there's an orphan, and how they talked about it, and how his brother, how this person became his brother. So these are stories, and in this story, these are all teaching stories. Most Indigenous stories are teaching stories. There's a lesson to be learned in all of them. Ceremonies, I briefly referred to, like in the Ben Christmas song, he talks about having a Wigabaltuktink, a feast. A feast is often required to solidify or have a community acceptance of a particular thing or event or law. Here's a good example. I remember I was at a presentation one time on the Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus community, and they were talking, and one of the teachers was asking, one of her students was disclosing that this student was a transgendered person. And she said, and the teacher asked me, what do I say to that person? What do I do? I said, why not congratulations, and then have a feast. And I said, and look at it from that perspective. And that's what these ceremonies do. In the Ben Christmas song, that's what Ben says. You have to sing, the groom had to sing and have a feast and then do all the stuff before the marriage was properly. So ceremonies are a source of legal principles. The language, I tell 90% of the culture, 90% of the legal principles are contained in the language. For example, Nuji Mawinu is a generic name for a lawyer. There are other different types of Mi'kmaq names for lawyers. Nuji Yedem Wedeu, the advocate. Nuji Wigi Yedeu, the solicitor. Niganus, the leader, is another one, And so there's few words. It describes the action, but also the language is very descriptive, and it will also contain how things are to be done. For example, I had a question this morning about reconciliation in the context of a fishery, and I said, well, one of the things you need to do is you need to talk to somebody who are language knowledge holders and ask them to translate the concept in a particular form for you and listen to what they say. And in the translation, they will also let you know what the legal principles are contained in that particular word. Songs and chants. The Ben Christmas, again, that song, the chant is there. and that illustrate that's part of the legal principles that's required for navigating, moving from one world to another. Dances, it's a form of celebration, it's part of ceremony. If you go to a powwow, you'll see many different type of dances, and there's each one, there's special rules, requirements as to who and what they can dance and why they dance. So it's not just a simple getting out on the dance floor and you shake your booty type of thing. It's more in depth, more involved, and it also involves the whole community as a whole. So I mentioned a lot about Ben Christmas. Ben Christmas was the captain of the Grand Council, and give you a little background on him. He was born on the old King's Reserve on King's Road, where Gundawiktuk, it's called, where the stones are, and he lived in Port Morion, and he died in Amherst at the age of 70, we know that Ben kept the chants in living memory, and he had the foresight to record them, and they were placed in the museums of Nova Scotia. And then also, I also heard from my great grandfather, John Noello, and his name was John Noel, but I use the term Noello, which means that he's in a different realm, he's in a different world. He is no longer here in the living world, he's in the spirit world. So he told our family and passed the story down in our family that our songs and our chants, even our language, comes from the sisits, the birds. Oh yeah, here's the link. I got the link, and I'm going to go to it. I'm going to quickly play this link. I wonder if I can you see this page?
No, I can't.
I'm going to stop sharing. I got to share that screen again. Okay, when you click on the link, this is the page that comes up.
That's there now, yeah.
So you have these Heritage Park moments, right? You have these audio recordings, Roy Gould, Peter Christmas, Helen Martin. Helen Martin was the first founder of the Native Women's Association of Nova Scotia. Roy Gould was the first one of the first chiefs in member 2, and he also founded Native Communication Society of Nova Scotia. Peter Christmas was the first founder of the Native oh my God, I can't remember now. Mi'kmaq Association of Cultural Studies. But we're going to go and visit Ben Christmas here. So here's the section on Ben Christmas, and this gives him here's a photo of him, and there's a little bit things. This was Danny Christmas, who's Senator Danny Christmas. This was his grandfather. And so, and you see a couple of these songs and chants, audios that he was in. And so he has these pre-marriage customs here, and the marriage failure song, hunting song, feast song, days of the week. So if you go to, I've mentioned pre-customs, and then you'll see this, it's an MP3 song here, and then it's a translation in Mi'kmaq. I know many people may not be able to read this, and then there's an English translation here, and he talks about his young, in this case, he's talking about an opposite sex marriage. He says, a young person must first notify his parent that the chief, then the chief, or whoever the head spokesman in a particular village is notified. So if somebody wants to marry, they have to tell their parents, and then they have to tell the chief, and then they call the people together to listen to the person. The young women are asked to come. Whoever feels confident to marry this young man, maybe 2 will arrive, possibly even 3, maybe more will arrive, 6, 7, or even more. Maybe none will arrive. And the young man will be the one to choose which he finds attractive, which he wants to marry, even though they never dated or even spoken. He completes his song. He sings a hunting song, and all the young women sit, the young man sits. He also intermittently dances near the girls he finds attractive. After his 3rd close dance by, then that is the one who seems to be attractive and therefore chosen as the bride to be. It is the chief who will join them in marriage. Once they are married in a big feast is then prepared. They sit, eat, and dance. Sometimes celebrations last 2 days or 3 days in what we call today a wedding. For too long, The young man who's recently married must demonstrate whether his union is a good one. Then everything is repeated as it was when they initially got married. If their cohabitating is good, then the young man sings a particular song. When he finishes singing, then there's known that union is good and another feast is had. There is great joy. If the union is not good, then the young man sings a particular song. He completes the song. There's great sorrow and much crying begins. This is what separation was like. Today we refer in English as divorce. The young woman simply returns to her parents and the young man returns to his. This is how the marriage ends. But they can get married again. They can choose another one, and the young woman can choose and can remarry. So that's you have the solemnization of marriage. You have to and the dissolution of marriage and stuff. And I'm just going to play a little bit here.
Kadu heduk mogis yachkinenak kichka nudamok dan kelimali ewurtidis nigma eskamana ala sudamakan melki bagwa sinagat kamatkina albadu nigwiget simali amrispadem wangego keginawadiwaji.
I'm just going to play a little part about this. One of the interesting things that I learned from this context was the fact that as a fluent speaker, there is a interesting song, and I'm going to play this one here. This is the marriage failure song.
Failure song. Negamna deli paroka vidabeka yinen. Negamna deli paroka vidabeka yinen. Jaanike aldalidot.
So, one of the interesting things, when I first heard this song, the marriage failure song, I was immediately intrigued by it because as a fluent Mi'kmaq speaker, I can understand. I take it and I understand. A lot of people can't understand the songs or anything like that because of the impact of colonization and the loss of the language, etc., and in residential schools, etc. I was taken aback by one particular phrase, Nige al dalidut, nige al dalidut, kach al dalidut. And over the course of my life, I had heard these phrases sung by my cousin Joey, and every single time I heard them, we would be at Maligwedge around the campfire. He would bring out his guitar. After a few beer, he would start singing. And these phrases were incorporated into some traditional chants. And I always never paid any attention, to listening because, Joey had a few beer in him and he bring out the guitar and, they all sang and I'm like, okay, yeah, here we go again. We're singing when they're all drinking, that type of thing. I thought it was a drinking song. You would go to the Steel City pub in the evening and start, singing out karaoke. It's only but when Joey sang it, my cousin Joey, he slightly mispronounced the word Nige al dalidut, gal dalidut. In that song, he used to say, Nige al weshkui jimidij al dui muji medogui muji al dalidut, gal dalidut. And in that context, I always thought that's an odd. It doesn't fit right in when Joey was singing it. It didn't make any sense to me. And it's only when I heard it in this context and I'm like, oh, that's what it is. It's a divorce song. It's about, and basically he's saying that now I'm moping, and it's that person's fault that they're the ones who wanted to get married and both of us are unhappy. So the foundational ground for a divorce in Mi'kmaq would be you're not happy, which is quite contrary to the Canadian law, which is the foundation for getting a divorce. There's only one ground, and that is the marriage has broken down, irrevocably broken down. It's evidenced by three ways. One is adultery, abuse, and the other one is living apart for 1 year. Those are the evidence, but the one ground is that the marriage is irrevocably broken down. And so for Mi'kmaq, There's also one ground is that you're not happy in the marriage. So now let me stop the share here and go back to, well, I'm not going to stop share, but I'm going to share again, but it's to the, oh, I got them mixed up here. So I guess I dropped the thing. So give me 1 second while I pull up the presentation again. Let me close this up and bring up the presentation here. Okay, and then I'm going to go and screen. Oh, what happened to the screen share here? Where are you guys at? Oh yeah, there you guys are. Okay. I'm a little bit technically challenged here. So basically in this one, and I've informed it here, there's this enforcement gathering song. These are all the things that are needed, groom service, you know, and I mentioned the British North American Act of 1867, section 9126 and section 9212. They took the legislative power away from indigenous tribes and reallocated to the federal and provincial government. No. And so, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Was the British North America Act negotiated between the British government and Indigenous Canadians?
Are you talking about the British North America Act of 1867?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
it was imposed.
They just invoked it. They just unilaterally enforced it.
Yep.
Okay.
And the foundational principle of that is just, you know, 100 years before that, you were in the treaty period where the peace and friendship treaties were made. And the treaty period existed from 1923 to 1723 to 1790s. And after the virgin disease epidemics that happened, and you know, many tribes were just literally decimated by it. You know, Canada, the upper Canada, lower Canada, and the colonies, they no longer had to pay any attention to Indigenous people. No. And by the time 1850 arrived, the estimated number of Mi'kmaq people in Nova Scotia was 2,500. We were nearly extinct. So there you have the concept of the vanishing Indian. That was all over North America. The general consensus among folks was that the tribes were disappearing fast, and that within a short period of time, there will be no more Indigenous peoples left. You know, and that there was a whole movement towards saving the culture. A lot of anthropologists went out and archaeologists went out, dug up stuff, grave bones, pottery shards, basket making. A lot of people did a lot of collecting of cultural artifacts, but nobody wanted to save the Innuos. You know, there was an assumption that they were going to die. And when they were pressing ahead with creating Canada, they just didn't feel the need to even consult or anything like that, because at that point, everybody was just under the understand that Indigenous people were dying and would be, the Indian problem would go away shortly.
And that was through disease to a large extent?
Yep. 90, you know, Mi'kmaq people, about 98, 99% of Mi'kmaq people died as a result of disease.
Was it mostly smallpox?
Well, smallpox took out a whole whack, but it was also measles, mumps, influenza, diphtheria, cholera, a lot of diseases that were kind of treatable, but since the Innuos had no natural immunities to them, and there was no vaccines available, no, and there was no, and Innu people didn't have. People say, well, we had plants and medicines that worked for particular items, but not for these new ones, because in order to do the research to find out which plants worked on smallpox, you need to do research on it. And Indigenous research takes hundreds of years, you know, of trial and error to observation, etc. It's not like what we do today, right? You know, it takes a few years, and you have clinical trials, etc. And you know, so the only plant that we found to be somewhat effective against smallpox was Kuoruik, which is the pitcher plant. And it's only when vaccines were introduced that the Mi'kmaq started to bounce back.
Thank you.
And I mentioned that my great-grandfather, John Well, told us our songs and chants and our laws come from the birds. It's a lovely picture of a white-throated sparrow in Suquamish singing their heart out in my backyard. So I also like to give myself a shout out at these presentations. I'm a good photographer and I do nature photography, predominantly birds. So this is a picture of a pretty bird that's in my backyard. So I'm shameless that way, I promote myself. So it's not just in the language where you can find the Ilnue Debludagan. You'll find it in other expressions. I mentioned ceremonies, stories, and language and songs. This is where you're going to find Ilnue Debludagan or Mi'kmaq laws. So ceremonies, I'm going to drill down a little bit, but not too much. I think often back in the 70s, 80s, and even in the early 1990s, people had this concept that we were looking for justice as healing, and that we were focusing on healing, that justice can provide healing. You start to see that conversation shift away. Nobody's really saying that in Indigenous communities anymore, or even in Canadian. Now it's, seen as reconciliation, and so, but, there's still the concept of justice as healing. So there are many different phrases. One of the phrases, and I think about it, I use the Mi'kmaq star as an example. And using that as a model to follow, you have one of the phases of dispute resolution, and it's called Obalama Dijik, which means there is a dispute between the parties. The parties have dispute. Now, I just want to touch base on something before I forget this. Part of the role of treaties, and if you read this 1725, 1752, 1760, 61, all these covenant chain of treaties, there's always a dispute resolution clause, and that if, our treaties were not just about peace and friendship, they were also about trade. And that's where you get the moderate livelihood issue that's currently all the rage now in Nova Scotia and elsewhere. It's all about the trade issue, right? And it's quite interesting that phrase, moderate livelihood, does not appear in any treaties at all. And none of the parties asked for that. That came out of a Supreme Court judge who thought this was a good way to define it. So, and then from there, that's what's happened now. So Obalama Dijik. And you can see it that sometimes I diverge and go off on a little tangent. I'll always come back. So Obalama Dijik is when there's a dispute between the parties. Something has happened. There is a breakdown in the relationship. People are not getting along. And people say, well, how do we move them into a relationship or restore the relationship? Often I'll sometimes mention as, restoring the balance. The balance has to, or the equilibrium. They're restoring the balance. And you don't go from Obalama Dijik to Abiksik Dijik right away. There's a time and place. So the next phase in justice as healing ceremonies is that the parties have to be, you look at Betkama Dijik, a refereeing, a timeout, as a separating of the parties, creating a healing space between the two, so that the dispute can be examined and looked at without all of the passion, the emotions that are carried with it when people are emotionally attached, or they're very raw to their emotions. So the dispute happened, and sometimes what people will say, you need to take the time to calm. I don't want to say calm down, but in a way that's what it is. You have to separate or keep the space in order to allow the folks to talk about what happened in a logical, rational manner. And that's where you get to Abiksik Dijik. Now, when you say Abiksik Dijik, sometimes today they'll think about it as the Christian concept of forgiveness. We forgive your brother, forgive each other, forgive each other in the name of Christianity, that thing. But a basic strategy is more than that. Not only is it a restoring of the friendship or the relationship or whatever it is, it's also an agreement, a contract, a binding legal process in a way. But even still, the folk says that's still not enough. You still have to take it one step further, and you get into Wigabaltultink, which is the feasting ceremony. Now, I've used this several times, to resolve disputes in Mi'kmaq communities. And one of the interesting disputes I did it for was a dispute between a deckhand and a captain on a boat. The deckhand was not happy about the number of hours they got, the duties and everything. And the captain was ready to fire him, and they had a big fight. And they were first cousins, but they worked together and they're family members, right? So there's all these multi-layers of complexity in a way, and as you peel them back, I kind of have to understand this. And the entire family was getting involved, that thing. So there was a dispute. So first thing we did, we sent out facilitators, and they separated the parties. They told, nobody can go fishing, nobody was going, and they said, we have to calm down. This took a few days before the parties were listened to as they described their dispute in a non-judgmental, way, and they were asked questions about, what they perceived and everything. Over that period of time separating apart, each party, after listening to after telling their story over and over and over again, they began to understand what their role was in the dispute. Once they started doing that, then was time to bring the parties together, and then they can talk to each other without any real passion, basically without the two men trying to kill themselves or beat each other up, basically, right? So, but they can talk about what they felt like and all this other stuff, and they can be heard by the other party. And as a result, then they were able to come to an agreement as to how they're going to resolve their dispute, and then this agreement was witnessed, talked about by others. They were okay with this, but we still did not have enough. Now, our Western Canadian system often ends there. It might skip the Bekamadutin, Wobalamadultin is there. It might only use two of the spots, but it goes somewhat to a Bisitadutin or the judgment component. And people walk away, and without, in the Illinois, the last stage, which is very necessary to help restore the feelings or to restore the relationship, is we go about to the feasting. So at this presentation, I brought up a Waltus game, and I had the captain and the deckhand, both first cousins. They started playing Waltus together. And all the community members were sitting there watching them play Waltus, urging them on, carrying on. Some of these traditional games, you can't really play without, pretty soon you're relaxed, you're chatting up, you're making fun, you're gently teasing each other, and some innuendos are flying back and forth as the game is fast and furious and everything. And within 5-10 minutes, both parties are laughing away, playing a game that they played since they were children. And their relationship, although it is not exactly back to where it was before the dispute happened, it's pretty close. Because they both have to live in the same community, they both have to live with the same family, they both are part of a natural community. And so there has to be some way of, for them both, each of them, to save face, to, achieve justice, to be part of the community. Now, that's not to say that, the scars from the dispute will ever be the same. They'll never be the same. It'll never exactly go back. But this way, they're able to live together in a balanced, happy relationship, and that the disputes no longer hurting all of their families. So, Yes?
Can I ask a couple of questions about that?
Yeah.
So I guess a couple. First one is who asked you to participate in this, and what is your authority in this? It, I guess let me leave it at that.
Okay, well, this was when we were doing I was part of a facilitated training with the 3 communities in Quebec, Gaspé, Escabéguiar, Listowitch, and in Ilsibuktuk. No, 4 communities, and it was through Mi'kmaq Mawiomi Secretariat up there. And we were training people to become facilitators, or as the Quebec government used to refer to us, alternate dispute resolution process, ADR. No, but when we got involved, we said, this is not ADR, this is not going to be an alternate, this is going to be the dispute resolution process, especially and particularly for civil matters. No, and so we spent about 4 years, I spent about 4 years working with the 4 communities, training them, helping them move along. And this was one of the events that happened in Gaspé. And it was not a, I didn't come in with a particular authority or any designates or anything like that. Nobody came into the circle with those things. It was almost we're here to help you find a solution.
So the community invited you, or the 2 disputing parties invited you?
The community invited us.
Okay, okay.
And the 2 disputing parties were brought to, and that's another phrase that they use in like in child welfare. Mawolo jigigamanach. Instead of going through the court system and apprehending a child and everything, if the child is in need and protection, agencies will have the authority to call upon the community members. Mawolo jigigamanach means they call upon the immediate family members of this child, and often they might be a niganus, a spiritual leader, a grand council member, or even a counselor, chief, or somebody with a little bit of maybe a position authority. And they would say to the people, what are you going to do to help this child? It's like you're asked about your obligations and you have to contribute, or you can just say, I can't help, I won't help, or do anything. It's entire. But when you come to these circles, you know what you're doing, you know what you have to offer, and you have to, basically, say that, you're there to help.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, and in the same way as the worldview always views the running down of the emotions, the running down of the energies between relationships, and you can find it. You can find people who have been friends who have been friends for many years. They may not be in touch with each other, but they run into each other at the mall, and within a minute or 2, they've caught up. In fact, they don't even have to say anything. They picked up their friendship where it was left off. Doesn't seem so. But some relationships need renewal, and always the energies. The Mi'kmaq see that everything's constantly running down, and you need to renew the relationship, renew the commitments, renew the compact. So it's the same as spring turns into summer, summer turns into fall, fall turns into winter, and winter comes back to spring. And even our treaties, the treaties are always needing renewal, and that's where you got the renewal ceremonies that occur every October 1st in Halifax and in elsewhere. Well, they always say that the relationship always needs polishing, renewal, and constant attention. So, and the same thing with justice as healing. So, I tell people, when you look at stories, that was ceremonies. Now we're going to go morph into stories, and people say, well, stories are stories and everything. Well, I said, judges tell stories all the time. They're called precedents. This is how a previous judge handled it, and I am obliged or bound to follow them. That's really a story about this is what happened before, this is how that judge resolved it, and I'm going to use that same example applied here. It's a precedent, right? You have some very old stories, like for example, Stephen Augustine, who's the associate vice president of CVU, he often tells the story of the creation story, Glooscap, and which is a very, very old story, and then you have contact stories, and I shouldn't really use that phrase, but at the time I wrote this, I was like, okay, contact, the early arrival of the French and the British, I should say.
Duma, just let me give you a heads up. There's about 5 minutes left before I think the class ends.
Holy jumping jellyfish. I got many. Okay. I'll just finish this off, and I don't think I have too many more.
Okay.
Well,
I think we've got an hour and 15 minutes at the Zoom meeting, and I don't know what happens then, if it just goes off air or what.
Generally speaking, there's lessons in every story that are being taught by the storyteller. You need to be an active listener. The key to learning about Indigenous or Inuit law is to be an active listener. All of these stories, many of them, all about journey stories. The journey into the unknown, journey into the forest. For example, people would ask, or the early ones, they would ask Sister Dorothy, what is it like going to university? You'll even see it here. I see there almost every September, the first Mi'kmaq students come, and they're supposed to go for advising, they're supposed to go here, they're supposed to ad hoc people, they're supposed to look at us. The first people they ask is the older upper year students, the third year, fourth year students. Who should we take? What should we go? Here's the library. This is what you do. All the shortcuts. They go to the students first because they're the ones who have completed the journey or were on there into the forest, right? Whether the forest is academia, employment, or even going to Ottawa, or even from another reserve. The language is Proto-Algonquin, it's verb-based. The language purpose is to maintain and establish relationships. And I'm just going to leave that there for 1 second. Now we have some legal or justice related words. Il sudiget, to make right, to judge correctly, basically to counsel the person back to the proper behavior. Nijodiget, witnessing, like a marriage witnessing, these Nijodiget will become the official storytellers of that particular event, because there's a realization that if people experience a particular event, if 100 people experience it and they were there, they saw it, there'll be 100 different stories and different perspectives on it. So when they appoint Nijodiget, they're the ones who have the extra burden or the extra authority to witness, and that their story becomes the official line. There's a citation authority. Anus to Magwit, there's another one. And the challenges in contemporary one is that we want to have an Illinois justice system. But the folks, and I try to incorporate it with the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, they basically said, part of their recommendations, their calls to actions, their calls to justice is that Indigenous legal principles or Indigenous laws need to be woven into the fabric of our justice system in Canada, so that every single lawyer, every single judge, every single RCMP officer, every single justice actor in place has an awareness of Indigenous laws. So my paper is published. Here's the citation for it if you want to see it, pretty sure. So I just want to make the point, Aboriginal law difference on there's another source of Indigenous law, and that's the Covenant Chain of Treaties. And here's the last thing. People say, well, how do we bring it into the court system? Well, the court system has already used Indigenous law. Judges use Canadian law. They cite this Constitution. They use they cite statutes. They have conventions that they use, precedent, and they use civil common law. However, in a case in 1867, this one, Connolly versus Woolridge or Johnson, I've linked it up here. I think there is this, right? Basically, in this case, this was one of the first times, the first instances where a judge used Cree Anishinaabe law in deciding a case. And it was a case of marriage, and inheritance. So the judge said that a country marriage made by a French a voyager to an Anishinaabe woman was valid, and her children were perfectly entitled and were entitled to sharing the estate of the father, basically. And because at the time that this father was in the north of Manitoba and northern Ontario, country law, there was Canadian law had not been established in that territory, and so Anishinaabe law was there and had not been pushed out. So the Anishinaabe law regarding marriages, solemnization, and divorce was valid there, and it was incorporated. Other cases, that used Indigenous law was ICB case in British Columbia, where grandparents were raising their grandchildren traditionally. There's customary adoption cases in the north. And so moving Indigenous laws, like for example, Nudugalim is a Mi'kmaq law on conservation and hunting and gathering and provisioning, and it applies. How do we apply it to, for example, the recent Clearwater acquisition by Member 2? How are they going to apply? They're going to be using DFO rules and regulations regarding the commercial fisheries, ties, traps, everything. But Member 2 also has an obligation to bring in Indigenous legal principles like Nudugalim into their practices. Thank you very much. Here's another picture of a bird. So I'm opening up for questions. Stop share. There you go.
Thanks, Duma. In case we just get bumped off, let me thank you. That was terrific, and I certainly learned a lot today, and very different from your talk you gave last year in a sense. I mean, you covered the same paper, but in a quite different way. And I learned a lot more again today listening to you. Does anyone have any questions for Duma?
I heard puppy. Is there a puppy?
Oh, my wife's telling one of our dogs no. So.
Oh. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I'm perfectly fine. It is, it's towards the end of the term, and I know that everybody's all zoomed out. So
Yes, we actually have one class left. So just to remind folks, I have meetings all Friday afternoon, so I've canceled class for that. And we've got one more class next Wednesday. It's on punishment. You can find that in your text, and the PowerPoint slides are up on the course Moodle page. So I will see everybody next Wednesday. Have a good American Thanksgiving if you want, but don't get together with too many people and stay safe. So take care, and once again, thank you to Duma for his wonderful talk. Bye-bye, everyone.
Voilà. And I'm gonna hold on.
I think I can.
No, I'm going to move you over now.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, so I can now end it. Okay, thanks, Duma. That was wonderful. Great. See you later. Take care.